brown-skinned girl. Why would you hurt yourself when your entire world already gets that job done? Brown-skinned girl, no one's gonna love you but you. Don't you know that? Don't you know you gotta be tough, strong, able to carry your household on your head and your siblings on your back? Brown girls, they don't crack, they don't cry, they don't bleed, they don't cut. Brown girls, didn't they warn you?
No other human race could survive shirtless more than 4 days without experiencing a severe skin burn. The only race capable of withstanding days and months without problem and without sunscreen is the Negro race with black skin. I paint and I never had a preference for this or that color. A painter likes all the colors, but we say that we must give back to Caesar what belonged to Caesar. Well, let's give back to the Egyptian what belongs to the Egyptian. The Egyptians of the pyramid for millennia were Negroes, neither olive-skinned nor mulatto, but charcoal black.
The Egyptians memorialized and imprinted their negritude in granite and quartz for eternity. What must we do? Destroy them to erase this era of humanity? Hide them? Speak out? Say nothing? Ask yourself these questions.
For 1,500 years that the Ottoman Turks had put in place, and they partnered with the Western European. And that's what really fueled the transatlantic slave trade, not Africans selling Africans. Let me say that again, it's a myth, this thing about Africans selling Africans. I'm sure that happened with a few greedy, sick people, but for the most part, Africans were fighting to save Africans. That you'll find in our oral tradition all through our history. But we were outgunned and outnumbered by military people. We were not military societies. It's a myth about the great African warrior. We didn't need a great warrior because we didn't fight wars. So stop that myth trying to imitate the white man. When we had to meet people on the battlefield, we did get ready and we did fight in self-defense. But we did not have armies of aggression sitting around waiting to kill anybody or invade anybody. So the African warrior thing is a myth. All Africans were warriors. All were obligated to protect their society and defend the integrity of their village and their city and their town. And you will find that if you go into West Africa and you study the history and you go up to Salaga, one of the biggest slave camps in West Africa, and hear their story. If you go to Paga, along the borders of Burkina Faso and Ghana, and see the slave camps up in those mountains and hear their stories, then you'll know how our people fought to keep us from being captured and taken into slavery.
What did you find?
We did not see any, even one single individual that could be considered as the descendant of the Homo erectus in China. Rather, everybody was a descendant of our ancestors from Africa.
The result couldn't have been any clearer. How did it make you feel as a Chinese person?
After I saw the evidences that we generate in my laboratory, I think we should all be happy with that, because after all, modern humans from different part of the world are not so different from each other.
Ancient Africans pictures in European gallery. Don't let slavery be the only history you know about your ancestors. Follow for more African history content.
Over the years, the truth has slowly begun to emerge, and many schools of thought have developed within the conscious community.
You cannot enslave a mind that knows itself, that values itself, that understands itself.
It is up to us to teach our children the rich and diverse history of melanated peoples across the globe. We must remember great African warriors, such as Hannibal of Carthage and Queen Amanirenas of Nubia, both of which defeated the mighty Roman Empire. And Memnon, the king of Ethiopia, who fought in the Trojan War, was known to be one of the greatest warriors in Greek mythology. We must revive great African kings, such as King Pi, the Kushite pharaoh and founder of the 25th dynasty of Egypt, and Mansa Musa, the 9th Mansa of the Mali Empire, and wealthiest man in world history. Most importantly, we must reclaim our classical African civilization, Egypt, affectionately known as Kemet. We live in the age of information, and it is time we pierce the veil of ignorance and retrace our steps across the sands of time.
Did you know Africans invented binary code?
On the world? Yes, through a mathematically related fortune-telling system. You're doing these random lines, you're counting them off, drawing all these lines in sand. If there's an even number, you put down 2 strokes. If there's an odd number, you put down 1 stroke. And when I went to these folks and asked them if they could tell me more about it, they said, no, this is a secret, I can't tell. So I had to go through the initiation ritual to become a Bamana divination priest. So what I found was that back in the 12th century, this system went up into Europe, and it was taken up by the alchemists. Now Leibniz, the German mathematician, when he invented the binary code, he was actually studying this system. And then it goes from Leibniz to George Boole, creating Boolean algebra. Boolean algebra gets turned into hardware by John von Neumann. That's the birth of the digital computer. So all those little ones and zeros running around in all of our digital circuits really start with that African origin.
They considered the king's foot. The length of the king's foot could be used as a standard. This standard would be multiplied and distributed throughout the kingdom. They considered the feet, arms, legs, and elbows of the king, but there was a problem. This unit was not fixed. There would be no problem during his reign, but all the kings were not the same size. The next king would surely want to use his foot or his elbow out of pride. In the hills, waiting for the retreat of the Nile, the Egyptians thought and looked for a solution to the problem. This unit of measurement would have to have a fixed length in time, if possible, never change. They observed the size of different plants, fruits, seeds, any object in nature. But all these objects did not have a constant size. For example, if we water a seed well, the following year its size will have changed. And over long distances, small differences quickly became significant. Then, they had the idea to measure water. Yes, fresh water from the Nile. They measured 1 drop and then another. They were all the same size. From the lower Nile to the upper Nile, the drops were the same size. They noticed that the size of the water drop did not change year after year. It's wonderful. The Egyptians found a unique unit. The diameter of the drop of water on a waterproof surface, like granite or alabaster, is constant. It measures 1 centimeter. Today, an incredible video in which you will dive into the heart of the first stage of the Serapeum project. Oola, 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 oola. So this is the stop M on the diagram. I don't know if the Egyptians knew the meter or not. I don't know at all. You even checked the measurement? You measured it 2 times? I double every measure every time. Okay, so 1 meter. 1.000 meters. Precisely 1 meter measured by laser twice in a row. They named this small unit the royal finger. 10 drops of water or 10 royal fingers equals 1 royal hand. 100 drops of water, so 100 royal fingers or 10 royal hands, equals 1 royal leg. Centuries later, these discoveries were taken out of secret coffers and renamed. The royal finger was called the centimeter, the royal hand the decimeter, and the royal leg the meter. They were presented as recent discoveries, and the French appropriated them, made in France. The diameter of the drop of fresh water measures what is now called 1 centimeter. Water is a universal constant. The size of the drop of fresh water will never change for thousands and millions of years. Yes, the universal unit, the meter, was not invented in 1780, but it was discovered by the Egyptians millennia ago. The meter is a universal unit because it is measured on water. Water is the only material that is stable. All other materials or objects are difficult to measure, or else they vary over time. The architecture of the entire universe is constructed with this unit. Using the meter, this immutable unit, were defined the 6 fundamental units of physics and chemistry today. Amperes, Celsius, moles, candelas, seconds, and kilograms. So, everything. What does the head of the Sphinx look like? With 3D face reconstruction software, here is the face of the Sphinx reconstructed correctly for the first time. No comment. Since they were black, it makes sense to make a sculpture in their image. Like a painter who paints his god in his image, the Egyptians made the Sphinx to theirs. It is hard to imagine white Egyptians making a sculpture of their god or their king.
It is unfair to show you a recipe without showing you the real chef of these monuments. Look at all this sculpture. You'll notice one thing. They all have broken noses. If one observes the statue and frescoes, the resemblance is striking. The nose, the big lips. Indeed, many said to have a broken nose because they had, as they say, a Negro noses. Herodotus said that Colchon was a colony of the Egyptians because they had black skin and curly hair. Book 2, Euterpe. The Colchon were an African colony which migrated to settle near the Black Sea. Aristotle also spoke of the Egyptians, describing them as excessively black. Those who are excessively black are cowards. They are the Egyptians and the Ethiopians. The Greek use 4 words to say black: dark brown. Keleinos, eremnos, aiton, and melas. Melas is the most complete physical black. It is the root of the word that forms the word melanin. Melas, melanin. Melanin is the pigment that colors the skin black to protect it from the sun. Aristotle will say precisely agan melanes to designate the Egyptian and the Ethiopians, which mean excessively black in Greek. Xerxes III, called Senusert in Egyptian, holds the record for the number of sculptures in his effigy, dozen. Almost all of these sculptures have broken noses, but some escaped the racial inquisition.
And what do we have here? In 1668, a Dutchman called Olfert de Poor traveled around Central and Western Africa, and he drew some pictures. This is the city of Luango in the Kingdom of Congo. Same year, drawn by the same guy. We can see clear evidence of urban planning, straight streets, terrace housing, multi-story buildings, again a wall around the entire outer city with gates in it. This particular state was almost like a sort of early client state of the Portuguese. For 2 centuries, they'd already been trading at this point ivory and pepper with the Portuguese. And this empire had an embassy in Rome during this period. Not something we learn about or are taught about too tough. Next slide, please.
Doing that when we were younger. None of you wanted to be African. You used to mock my food, my clothes, and my accent. And now that it's popular, now you want to embrace it?
I ain't from Africa. I'm from Crenshaw Mafia. Like it or not, you from Africa. I'm from Africa. You from Africa. You African booty scratcher.
He was actually quite annoyed about this and upset. I can understand why. Because it's like when we talk about cultural appropriation and how they take what's ours and they only take the things that are popular and praised. So I said to him, a lot of us lacked knowledge of self when we were younger. A lot of us were being manipulated and kept disconnected from each other. We were ignorant. But isn't it better that now we're waking up and acknowledging our roots? Now we can finally unite as we should do. But on the flip side, I remember having African people say that because I'm Jamaican, I have no culture and my people are nothing but drug dealers and criminals. I've even been told that I'm nothing but a slave from African people. Colonizers have been playing us off against one another since the beginning.
The world assumes white people are naturally good. So when something bad happens, it's a good person doing a bad thing. They assume black people are naturally bad. So when something good happens, it's only a matter of time before that animal's true nature rears its ugly head.
Ethnicity. Well, they have just told me that Shemai had Nubian features, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian, and that was unexpected.
Examining Shemai's anatomy closely, the thickness of his bones and the shape of his nasal cavity, the anthropologists think he was a black African, likely from neighboring Nubia. A huge revelation that challenges the prevailing image of the Egyptian ruling class.
We always thought the ancient Egyptian elites were Mediterranean type, and in this sense, Shemai is representing the society of the frontier, in which different ethnic groups were mixed. At the end, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. Shemai was Egyptian.
Sitimela si baten, mafele You believe that Jesus died for us?
The day I will see a white man dying for a black man, then I'll believe in the white Jesus dying for black people. As far as I'm concerned, the black man is still hanging on the cross, surrounded by the two thieves on the left and on the right. These are the Europeans and the Chinese who are busy crucifying Africa on the same cross. We cannot even talk about the death of Jesus. Let's talk about the dying of Africa constantly. Let's not create theology of poverty and misery and glorify the death of Jesus when our brothers and sisters are still dying. The death of Christ, therefore, is a symbolic death, the death of truth, the death of the poor, the death of the marginalized, the death of the children of the soil. And if religion is used to pacify that, then that is the doctrine of demons. For he came to set the captives free. And until Africa is free, there's no Jesus who has died on the cross. We are still dying to date. It cannot take one man to save the whole world. Yet we have 20 million Africans who drowned in the sea during slave trade. Is this God not tired of drinking blood? How much more blood does he need? Can you look at Congo? Give me the 15 million that died, plus the 35 million. Calculate all the wars that have been fought in Africa. How many more millions? You tell me that all this blood that has been spilled is worth nothing, except the blood of one man who hung on a cross. So theology must not be used to create a sympathy for the white man. Theology must be used to evoke the African to start thinking, have we come down from the cross yet? Or the Romans, they have not changed. They are still Europeans. They are still nailing our hands, the style of our work, putting on crowns of thorns on our heads, managing our minds and what we think, piercing our sides, poking our reserves of food and etc., nailing our feet, passports. You cannot travel without this and that. Can you tell me that Jesus died on the cross? The day I see a black man free, I will start talking about Jesus who died for the sins of the world. He could not have died for the black man, and the white man who believes in him did the crimes that he did.
Great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put that picture of Mahatma Gandhi up in his office and said that he got the operational technique for nonviolence from Mahatma Gandhi. It was somewhat premature for the ancestor, who's one of my favorites, but it was premature because now you automatically set the stage where African people would start looking to Mahatma Gandhi also. For example, last spring, last Black History Month, I was in Atlanta. I went to the Dr. Martin Luther King Shrine where he and Queen Mother Coretta are buried, and across the street is a museum. Outside the museum is a life-size statue of Mahatma Gandhi. I couldn't believe it. This is a museum dedicated to the honor of Dr. King. But there's no statue of Dr. King outside of a museum erected in his honor. Instead, you have a life-size statue of Mahatma Gandhi. So the message to the child is what? That it was really Mahatma Gandhi who's responsible for you coming through the civil rights struggle, not Dr. King. Now, had Dr. King knew Mahatma Gandhi's true racist thinking and ideology, I'm sure he would have thought otherwise. As a psychologist, you can never know what's really at the root of somebody's thinking. I would argue that we should never make a hero of any other people. Mahatma Gandhi turned his back on Africans. Even when he came back to India and began fighting, he refused to give support to the African emancipation movements. And on more than one occasion, he had made derogatory remarks about Africans. And we also know the Dravidians of India, the Africans of India who are oppressed, were oppressed, and have always been oppressed in India. There is no record anywhere of Mahatma Gandhi fighting against the oppression of Indians in India who were black, the so-called Dravidians.
Emily B.
Emily B, where are you from, Emily?
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, that's awesome. So for you, black guys or white guys?
Black guys.
Okay, can you elaborate as to why specifically black guys?
Yes, black guys are melanated, and I want my children to survive, and I know that the only only way for them to survive in the future is for them to have melanin in their skin. So that's the way for me to, make my legacy continue. Make my legacy continue. Make my legacy continue.
According to the United States Census Bureau, by the year 2042, Caucasian people in America will be the minority. By 2042, you're dealing with people whose bodies cannot sustain life. Right now, more white women's wombs are not able to hold a baby up to 9.5 months, and they're having miscarriages. So they're having more deaths than births, according to the United States Census Bureau. When you're dealing with a group of people who look at their livelihood and it is dwindling, there are actions that need to be taken. So not only do we have the black women being encouraged to have hysterectomies, but we have the white women being encouraged to have more children. You have the abortion clinics in 78% of the inner city neighborhoods, while you have the majority of fertility clinics in the rich neighborhoods. You have body parts. Women, black women, are being encouraged to get hysterectomies, but those hysterectomies are not being petitioned to be received by trans men. It gets very deep.
Wow.
Very deep. I know, curveball. I know.
That took a turn.
I know.
Yeah.
Another thing, you have organs, kidneys, you have lungs, hearts, etc., that are on the underground white market because black people don't control it. White and Jewish people primarily do control it, so I can't call it the black market. It's the white market. Okay, number one. Number two, hearts are worth a little over 100,000. Kidneys are worth over 20, 50,000, depending on where it is. And those black body parts, hence why 75,000 plus black men are missing. A lot of these children, 2,500 every year, are missing.
It sounds like Get Out.
It is Get Out. That movie was based on true stories happening all over the place. In America, right now, it is a $30 billion sex trafficking commercialized industry, meaning the money made from sex trafficking of children and women is now contributing to America's economic base. It is not a secret anymore.
And organ trafficking.
And organ trafficking, because people are dying. Which is why you shouldn't put organ donor on your driver's license. Because that makes you a target. This is a real world we're dealing with, y'all. Now, you brought me on Drink Champs, damn it. We dropping the real information.
You gotta drop the real.
I know what's
they found a bunker in Phoenix, Arizona a couple months ago with refrigerators full of hearts, kidneys, a few heads.
Before, he is one of the most significant young innovator and inventors in Zimbabwe. Maxwell Sanguluni was best known for developing a green power generator which can produce electricity using radio frequency. And he is now in a hospital in intensive care unit because according to his staff, he was poisoned, and they said they have been receiving threats and messages from people. They call them the clean energy or oil mafia, the people that have a lot to lose. If he continues with his invention, they are going to get out of market, and they don't want that.
First African queen of Britain.
Do we know the history behind the queen our city is named after? I spoke with local historians after Queen Charlotte appeared in a new Netflix show, and it's a history lesson for all of us.
Flawless, my dear.
The hit Netflix series Bridgerton, bringing renewed attention to the mixed-race British queen our city is named after.
Queen Charlotte, of course, is the namesake of our city.
Tom Hanchett, community historian in Charlotte, explains that Queen Charlotte was a German-born princess from Mecklenburg-Strelitz, Germany, to be exact. But her ancestral roots can be traced back to King Alfonso III of Portugal.
Before her German ancestry, she had roots into a Portuguese royal family, the family of King Alfonso III.
Up until the 1100s, there was an Arab and African occupation of Portugal. This is where King Alfonso found his wife, who was a Moor. In those times, the word was used to describe people of Arab or African descent. I spoke with Dr. Tekla Johnson about it.
He sort of marched with his troops into a Moorish-held town called Faro, and he demands the governor's youngest daughter. It wasn't a marriage, it was more like a concubinage, but it was a very high order.
Their son, Martin Alfonso, then marries into a family with African ancestry, further cementing Queen Charlotte's black heritage.
Remember, in the 1300s, we hadn't yet gone into the slave trade. There wasn't the same stigma that came later on.
Shonda Rhimes puts a black actress as Queen Charlotte, and now it has everybody talking about history. What do you think about that?
I think it's great. It causes conversations like this one.
Queen Charlotte would go on to marry King George III, the British monarch who lost the Revolution and the colonies.
So he marries a teenager. She's 17 years old.
This 18th century portrait of Queen Charlotte by Sir Allan Ramsay was used as propaganda in the colonies to win over enslaved blacks to Britain during the Revolutionary War. It now hangs in the Mint Museum.
Any schoolchild who comes to the museum remembers seeing that portrait of Queen Charlotte.
In 2007, artist Ken Apgar was commissioned by the Mint to explore Sir Ramsay's portrait of Queen Charlotte. That sparked a dialogue which led to 6 images and a variety of interpretations of the Queen.
Can you talk about what people saw when they saw her portrait?
There are phrases like black, white, other on one of them. There's another one that just says immigrant.
So as you drive around the Queen City and see Queen Charlotte's statue or her portrait, now you'll know a little more about the fascinating history.
A short history of Ethiopia and its monuments.
Now this, I will show people this and I usually ask, what is unusual about this building? But we haven't got time for the quiz. It usually takes people a little while to figure it out. But it's not technically a building, it's a carving. The architect and the builders of this 800-year-old church have dug down into the ground and carved the building out of the mountain. Next slide, please. And that's what it looks like inside. Okay, see, that's quite impressive for 800 years ago, quite beautiful. Next slide, please. This is a stele, weighs 450 family-sized cars, the equivalent of 300 tons. We don't actually know how 2,000 years ago, people in Ethiopia managed A, to carve this block of granite, and B, to get it to stand up without a crane. And can you see, if you look closely, it's imitating a multi-story building. I can't say that they had multi-story buildings, but there's a door at the bottom, and there's what are clearly floors and the imitation of windows going up to the top. Nonetheless, it's fairly impressive to get a 300-ton block of granite to stand up without a crane. And it isn't even the largest stele found in Ethiopia in this time. The largest one found weighs 500 tons, so almost double, but it's no longer standing. Next slide, please. Now, if I showed you these castles at the beginning of this presentation, and we didn't know this was a presentation on African history, we'd probably assume these were in England or Scotland or Norway, but these are Ethiopian castles from the 17th century. Next slide, please.
The truth is that this mysterious and greatly developed civilization was Egypt. If there is an obscured truth, it is that this Egypt was Negro. They discovered solar energy. Without solar energy, there would have been no Great Pyramid. Afro-Egyptians discovered that the earth was round, and they were the first to have traveled and explore it up and down. Whenever a civilization was brought into contact with Egypt, temples arose, and that civilization was propelled forward. A myth was born, that of cut stone. Humanity was built with all forms of concrete and not with cut stone. The ancient history of Egypt, Africa, Asia, and America must be fully rewritten. Before Michelangelo's sculptures, there was Egyptian perfection. Tell me again about the Mona Lisa's mysterious smile. I say, look instead at the enigmatic smile of Ramses II. Are you looking for Atlanteans? Here they are. They are in Egypt. With chemistry and physics, math and geometry in tandem, Negro Egypt allowed us to build temples, streets, houses, sports stadiums, enough to build humanity. They laid the pillars of science, the first alphabet, art, philosophy, medicine, and religions. They are at the origin of the cultures of the world. They created the cultures of the world. That is the greatest mystery of humanity. Wherever they settled, they built a temple, and later a city was born. Let's ask the right question. Should we put an end to the mystery of the pyramids maintained by some Egyptologists?
Has turned out to be DNA gold for scientists. It's providing key evidence about how the first humans colonised the planet 70,000 years ago. Using the hair, scientists have mapped the DNA history of Aboriginal Australians and found they're the direct descendants of the first modern humans to leave Africa.
This lock of hair has rewritten the history of human migration. It was taken from a young Aboriginal man near Kalgoorlie in the 1920s, and scientists have used the DNA to map the origins of the first Australians.
We find, in fact, evidence that Aboriginal Australians diversified from other populations much, much earlier than what people previously thought, about 70,000 years ago.
The research, published in the international journal Science, debunks the common theory that all modern humans migrated in a single wave out of Africa. Instead, the scientists believe descendants of Aboriginal Australians left first, followed by a second group of humans who would eventually settle in Europe and Asia.
Aboriginal Australians are descending from the first human explorers. I mean, these are the guys that went into unknown land while my ancestors and Asian ancestors were hanging around somewhere in Africa or in the Middle East.
It's the first time scientists have mapped an Aboriginal genome.
In Australia, they would literally breed out the melanin of the people. You know, they would have these, they would take the children and take them to breeding camps and breeding farms and breed the darker ones and the mulatto ones with white, and they would literally breed the melanin out of these people. The movie Rabbit Proof Fence is about that breeding process, them breeding out the melanin of the Aboriginal people. So it was very deep what was going on over there.
Some serious hair, huh? Looks just like the hair on our heads today. So if anybody tries to tell you that Egypt is a white civilization, you can point out this hair. So those of you who have your cameras, you want to make sure you take a good picture of it. But this is what Gaston Maspero, an Egyptologist, said about the hair in the Nile in Egypt. He says the hair was inclined to be wavy and even to curl into little ringlets, but without ever turning into the wool of the Negro. But take a look at that hair. It looks like wool, doesn't it? This is a picture of the hair that's on a figure that was found. So you can see what the person looks like and what the hair looks like.
Sacred locks. That's sacred locks. Dread is a British word that means fear. Okay? So we're all over Africa. All the pharaohs wore their hair locked. That's why they wore the cloth when they went public, to keep it clean. All pharaohs were priests. All priests in all African cultures locked their hair. It was a reference back to ancestors and a time when we didn't have a comb or a brush, and our hair just naturally locked. So that's what the reference back to was. So to become a man in the community of the East African Maasai, you must lock your hair. They use the red clay to make it cling, but they're allowing it to naturally lock. To become a priest in Ghana, if you train at Latte or Kumasi, you take 3 years in the training process and you lock your hair. When the 3 years is up, you can cut your locks if you wish, or you continue to wear them. The same thing in Botswana and South Africa. You, to be a priest or priestess, you lock your hair. The same thing in Nigeria. You may, and in Benin, you may choose to cut it at the end of the 3 years if you wish. But the locking of the hair is a very sacred phenomena that referenced the most ancient ancestors at the time when we had not yet invented a comb or brush, and our hair just naturally, locked itself and matted itself. So that is what that reference back to, that sacred period in time. And so this is 1843 BC, and this is Brother Amen Ament. Is there any doubt whether this pharaoh is an African with locks?
Thousands of Egyptians traveled to America, now Guatemala, for the first time between 2000 and 3000 years BC. But not only the Egyptians, many other Africans accompanied them. Imagine, you are Mayans and you want to build a building to commemorate the dead or the gods. You observe and copy nature. You make graves in a circle, square, and all kinds of shapes. The last shape that comes to mind is that of a pyramid, and even less with tunnels passing underneath, as in Egypt. Recent analyses of Egyptian mummies have revealed traces of cocaine. The coca grows only in America. In addition, you must imagine them observing and measuring the equinoxes and solstices to align the pyramids. The Egyptian calendar started on July 14th, plus 5 days of celebration. That of Mayans also started on July 14th, plus 5 days of celebration. Then find the chemical formula for making concrete. By comparing the buildings of America and those of Egypt, the resemblance is striking, like 2 drops of water. Stronger evidence? What if we measured the pyramids of Central America? Before watching this film, the discovery of the standard of universal measurement, the meter, was a secret. It was complicated and abstract to find this universal standard. Now you know how the meter was invented by the Egyptians. And now the ultimate. The Egyptians who arrived here on the other side of the world.
Soweto.